Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is Debbie G of Spirituality Gone Wild.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Actually, Debbie is currently driving and hoping that she can connect to us via some cell tower that she gets. She's driving along. So hopefully she'll be connecting pretty soon. Neo just celebrated a birthday this week. So I believe he's off to the beach having a good time in southern Florida. So we'll catch him next week. But I do have a guest joining me today. And her name is Fatemah Mirza. She is the founder of CareerTuners. And we're going to find out in a moment about what exactly that's all about. But Fatemah, thank you, first of all, for joining me. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I mean, it's a Friday. How bad can it be on a Friday, right? So
Yeah.
the weekend's going to be off to a good start just because we're doing the podcast. But
do you have anything fun planned for the weekend?
Actually, this weekend is going to be more about recuperation for me because lately I've been taking dance classes, and I'm fairly active, but I also have a recurring sore spot. I don't even want to call it an injury. It's a sore spot in my calf, and it just doesn't want to seem to heal. So I'm just going to try to, stay off that for a few days.
Okay.
But other than that, it'll be a day probably just to kind of kick around also I own a gardening service business, and we're getting ready for the season to open in about 3 weeks or so. So I got a little work to do on that too.
Okay, that sounds.
How about you? What are you doing this weekend?
I am rearranging my pantry, which sounds really nerdy, but I'm very excited about it. I have measured everything out, and I bought the perfect baskets. So I'm going to organize everything and properly eat everything before the expiration date.
Yeah, right. That's a good idea. Yeah. So tell us about CareerTuners. How did that get started?
It started just with me helping a few of my friends with their applications, and it just snowballed from there. I mean, I saw that people were really struggling to talk about themselves in a way that sounded good. And people just weren't aware about what they were saying that was potentially off-putting. So helping people kind of have a little bit more transparency there was really gratifying. And kept getting an influx of clients. I started posting on Facebook and LinkedIn, and pretty soon I had to hire people to help support me.
Nice. Yeah, that's always a good sign. When the phone starts ringing off the hook, metaphorically speaking, you got something good going on.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's really good. Tell us a little bit about what you've encountered in terms of the ways that people tend to go wrong on their resumes. Where do they kind of create problems for themselves?
I think it depends on the age group, but I find a lot of young people tend to focus on just using their career services template, which is very cookie cutter, and it really highlights your flaws if you're a non-traditional student, or if you're working in the retail industry in order to put yourself through school. And I mean, these are all really big strengths, being a non-traditional student, working full-time while going to school. This is a huge achievement, but the way these cookie cutter templates are structured, you're just not showcasing your strengths optimally. And then I think later, when you're a little bit more experienced, the biggest mistake that I think people make is just kind of talking about things that have nothing to do with the hiring manager's immediate hiring needs, and not really understanding I don't understand how this is not relevant. And then, that's kind of being able to dissect that is I think what people need help with when they're a little bit more experienced.
It is really something that most people don't recognize, that one resume doesn't fit all jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, I experienced that. Like I said, I run a gardening business, and you would not be amazed, but many people would be amazed how many resumes I get from people who have loads of gardening experience, but there's not one mention of it on the resume.
Wow.
Because they're doing other things. They were working in retail, or some have been working in manufacturing. They've been doing various things, but they didn't actually structure a resume that says, oh, here's what I've been doing in the gardening business.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes it challenging as a hiring person, but I can imagine what it's like for somebody who is hiring for a mid to large size corporation, because they're just going to skip right past those. They're just not going to. They have so many people applying. Why should they bother?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I can see where that becomes an obvious one. One of the more less obvious ones is how do you handle that situation you were describing where the person is coming up through a less traditional channel, like you said, working their way through school or something like that. So I'm curious, how do you handle that one? How do you help them with that? Because like you said, the cookie cutter is not going to help them. So what do you
Yeah.
do?
We always started from scratch because, like, I mean, the fundamental rule to a resume is like whatever's at the top is kind of getting the most attention, and like it's kind of close and proximal to your job title is getting the most attention because that's what you're looking at, right? Like even when you were doing your gardening business and you were hiring people, you're like, okay, retail, like you were looking at their job titles. And so, like gardening was coming up. So that's exactly how, you know, people are reading resumes and just kind of organizing information accordingly so that it's whatever is most relevant is showing up there, helps the reader kind of read the rest of the resume more seriously. Let's say, for example, someone's applying to your gardening business and they just have like a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't relate to gardening. And then at the very end, they put like hobby gardening. You'd be like, okay, that's one tiny piece of information.
There is, yeah. It's valuable.
Yeah. However, if they started that at the very top where they're like, you know, hobby includes gardening. I have been gardening for like 30 years. I don't know how many ever years, and in like this much acre field, and, you know, kind of giving some context about their experience, you might be able to read the rest of their resume with that context and look upon it a lot more favorably. So that first impression is going to be like a lot stronger. Maybe they have some, you know, maybe they're applying for like a gardening management position and like the rest of their experience is like retail management. If that came first, you'd be like, whatever, they've been working at Kmart. Now you're reading it, you're like, oh, okay, this leadership experience can translate into the world of gardening. So it's like a lot of that, just like really kind of doing everything from scratch and throwing out like all these templates out the window is really the best bet. Everyone is so unique. Their career paths are so unique and their career goals are unique. So you cannot apply like a one size fits all.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Spot on. In fact, I can affirm what you're saying. If they put it at the top that they've been gardening for the last 20 years or something like that, that's an instant phone call. I've got to find out about that person because when somebody is taking the time to say that to me and making that, you know, front and center, that's somebody I know is not only serious about the job, they're serious about their love of it. They're serious about actually pursuing it. They've taken the time to tell me in a way that I can see instantly.
Yeah, they've taken the time to show you, to make it easy for you, right? They're not making you do the work.
Right.
The mental gymnastics. Yeah.
I'm also curious about a few other things that you might be helping people with. I'll give you a couple things that I look for when I'm looking at resumes. One of the things that I look for is how well do they express themselves? And you think, well, what does that have to do with gardening? But for me, what it has to do with gardening is if they take the time to, you know, make their grammar correct and their spelling correct and to express it in a way that actually, you know, is good English and so forth, that tells me they're oriented toward detail. And I want detail-oriented workers in the garden because we do what we call fine gardening, which is not like what the landscapers do. We go in with you know, manual tools and we're very carefully pruning and cutting and trimming and making it look like a real garden. Well, that's detail work. You know, and so while the average person putting their resume together may not think to put that into the resume, you know, that I'm detail oriented. Occasionally I get one that says that, but not too often. Just the fact that I can see how well they put their resume together tells me whether they're detail oriented.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I've had mixed results with using the resume as like an indicator of capability because like I just feel there's so much bad advice out there and a lot of people just aren't really aware how to present themselves well. Like we've been taught from a very young age that talking about ourselves is showing off. And that's bad, right? So I feel like while I would love to share like a couple hard and fast rules about like, okay, if they're doing this, that means they're going to be a good candidate. Like I have found a lot of candidates in the past that have broken said rules. So it's difficult for me to kind of boil hiring from a resume down to a science. If you ask me how to actually convey your experience, I can talk about that for like hours, you know? So yeah, that's a really good question. And I appreciate that.
Well, obviously, when you're working a gardening business, it's a very local business, and you're looking for in a very small geographical area. You're looking for people. So, as that kind of an employer or hirer, I need to be creative in ways that the larger I mean, the larger companies, they're going to get thousands of responses on their stuff. So
For sure.
they have to handle it all completely differently. Yeah, it's a very different animal. But that's also part of it, isn't it? It's understanding who you are reaching out to.
Yes, so much yes, completely. And like you said, these larger companies, it's like more bureaucratic, and not just that. There's usually not even a person that's looking at your resume as the first step. It's usually a tool that's going to parse your resume and make it easier for this person to understand who they should be looking at and who is a waste of their time. Because that's what's happening, is it's so easy to apply that people just spam their resume everywhere. Like, the job description will have very clear instructions, like, please do not apply if you're located outside of the United States, and like a whole bunch of people will be applying. So it's really important that these tools kind of help parse out all of these people that are clearly not a good fit. So understanding that, and then understanding that in a larger corporation, there's people that are going to be looking at your resume that are just screening and just doing like their HR work, versus decision makers who are responsible for the actual department that you're going to be working in. What those two players are looking for is going to differ, and how you write one resume that pleases like all three of these readers, the applicant tracking system, the HR person, and the decision maker, it can be a bit tricky, but it's not impossible.
So how do you go about doing it if you have never done it before?
How you would go about doing it if you've never done it before, you would probably start by taking a look at so this is what I would do. I would take a look at the job description that you're applying against and kind of reverse engineer that using your resume, as opposed to being like, okay, well, I went to college here and my first job was blah, 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 as opposed to doing it that way, which kind of takes everything you have and vomits it on paper. What you're doing now is you're being very strategic with the information you share. Because what happens when you have that vomiting approach, where you're just like putting everything on there, is there's a big chance that something that you put on there is not going to be relevant to what they're looking for, and they're going to pigeonhole you. They're going to say, okay, this person is flip-flopping too much. They're going, from one thing to another. Their task set is too broad. It doesn't allow you to filter your language properly. So if for example, you're going to be applying to a small local gardening business, you can use language like, hey, I'm really good with small budgets. I'm really good at setting processes up from scratch. If you're applying to like a larger organization, you can use language like, look, I can take teams that are demoralized and I can uplift them. I can improve their productivity. I can handle 7-figure budgets easily. Like, you can use language that speaks to what you're finding in the job description, and that'll make a much more powerful resume. And if you're like, well, this is going to be really challenging because I'm applying to too many different kinds of jobs, then you need to focus your job search a little bit. Like, you need to have one resume for each kind of job that you're applying for, and consider really just applying to one or two kinds of jobs. Because I think what a lot of people do is they're like, okay, I can do sales, I can teach, I can do marketing. And like, now your friends and family can't really help you, because they're like, they're like, imagine someone comes to you and they're like, listen, I can clean your house, I can prune your garden, I can drop your kids to school, like, I can cook all your meals. You would be like, I don't know what to do with you, because this is too much information. So it's just like that. You have to be very precise with your messaging to help your network help you.
It's an interesting point, because what you're also addressing is the fact that the hiring manager, whoever that hiring manager is, has very specific characteristics and qualifications and data points that they're looking for. Right. And you don't necessarily know what they are, other than, like you said, what they put into the job listing. And even then, it's not going to be necessarily a one-to-one. I mean, the job listing could have been put together by somebody else in the department who had nothing to do with the hiring.
Or they might be just really bad at writing job descriptions. Yeah, that's a skill, right?
Yeah, it is a skill. And it's unfortunately one that a lot of people don't have. Yeah. I can tell. I've looked at some of them. But that makes it even more challenging for the applicant.
It does.
Now you have to kind of get in the head of somebody, and you don't even know what's going on in their head.
Yeah. I I mean, I think it does get easier as you practice the skill and as you become aware of what's going on in your industry overall, especially if you're like a senior executive and you're like, okay, this is what's happening in my industry. These are like the socioeconomic factors that are like currently impacting our trends and all of that. You can speak to that and build a resume more along how you are a leader in that industry as opposed to being like, hey, I can do X, Y, and Z tasks proficiently. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into a resume that I think a lot of people don't consider. But these are the things that really make or break your job search and can really make, a 40, 50, $70,000 difference in the offer that you end up getting.
It's a great point. Something else that occurs to me too, you mentioned earlier that the career path of somebody, say, working their way through college is going to be different from somebody who's just, attending a four-year institution and getting their degree. But the same kind of issue can apply to somebody who's already been in the work world for some time, and they're trying to shift. They're trying to move to a different field, or they're trying to move to a different job space within the same field. And the resume that they have doesn't really match. I mean, it's not the skill set that necessarily the hiring manager is looking for, and yet they know they can do the job. I mean,
Right.
is that hopeless? Do they have to just spend their time trying to get credentials, or what's the solution?
Yeah, the solution's pretty straightforward. It's to like basically use the job description to filter out something that is not maybe worth sharing in that precise moment. Like we know on the other side of the table as job seekers that like having a broad skill set is instrumental for innovation, productivity, and everything related to basically business outcomes. However, applicant tracking systems are specifically designed to weed out people that don't have, a specific numbers of experience in that field or whatever. So you have to be able to say that, look, I know it says here that I have been doing X, Y, and Z. However, here are all the tasks that relate to what you're hiring for. So people look at that and take it seriously and don't immediately pigeonhole you and dismiss you and all of the valuable experience that you're bringing to the table. This is not to say you should leave jobs out of your history and create like giant employment gaps in your resume, because that's not going to look good either. It's just about how to strategically word things so you're not going on and on about something that isn't relevant. So for example, let's say recently I helped a client of mine transition from office supply sales to software sales. And I was like, okay, well, we can't talk about like office supplies on your resume. We have to talk about software. So what are some of the software solutions that you help sell? And like, tell me about that. And we just kind of focused the resume on that, because even selling office supplies, you are selling software. You're not doing it all the time. So rather than focusing on all the other stuff you're selling, just focus on software. And that's what he did. And then he ended up getting a really great job. So it's just that simple.
It sounds like what you're describing can kind of be pigeonholed into, instead of presenting what your job history is, present what your task history is.
No, you still want to present your job history, because when you have a resume that's too like non-traditional looking and it has like a wonky structure and there's like it doesn't have that traditional employment history layout, first and foremost, it's unlikely that an applicant tracking system can parse that, because it needs to see like, okay, this was the date where you worked here, so that means this is how much experience you have as a such and such job title, right? So that's the first issue. The second issue is like, as someone on the other side of the table, when you see a resume like that, your guard goes up. You're like, what are you trying to hide? Why are you using this funky structure? Why are you not being transparent about where you worked and for how long? Have you been in jail for the past 10 years? There's all kinds of pessimistic ways to look at a resume like that, as opposed to one that's a little bit more transparent. So working within that traditional structure is important. It's just about the word choice that you're using for each piece of content.
So by the word choice, it sounds like you're talking about the description that you're attaching to each one of those jobs.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now I'm imagining that the resume is a listing of the different jobs, but each one rewritten in the description to hone in the best way it possibly can to the job that you're applying for.
Yes, exactly. So if you're like an older professional, you might be like, okay, I'm like kind of updating my resume as I go. When you look back at like, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that stuff, it's probably like kind of off-putting now. Like I've like, especially like let's say you're in the technical industry, you're in the software industry. If you're going on and on pages and pages about technology that's no longer in use, that makes you look obsolete as opposed to experienced. You know what I mean?
Basically, what we're talking about here is branding.
Branding, exactly.
That's another one of those uncomfortable areas.
Yeah, because you do have to speak to your audience, and like understanding who they are and what makes them tick can be very tricky.
Well, it also, I mean, I'm thinking about what you mentioned earlier, how we don't really like to show ourselves off. We're trained
No, we
not to.
don't.
And this
No.
is like, yes, show yourself off and do this in a way that shows you have a great brand. And that's, oh my God, now I'm a marketing item.
Yeah, but also pleasant to work with. Like it's such a delicate balance between like overdoing it and underdoing it. So it can be tricky. I can see why people struggle with it.
Yeah. Why do you think you're so good at it?
I don't know. I just feel like I'm very objective and I have the capacity to tell somebody like, listen, this is not doing you justice at all. Like I know you just after a conversation with you, I know you have so much more to offer than this like garbage piece of paper that you put together. Sorry, but it's true. Like, you're worth more than this. I think they quickly identify the strengths that somebody has. And the other thing that I'm also good at is really knowing how they're being perceived. So I have the capability to tell somebody like, listen, I know you're trying to convey passion, but you sound really opinionated and kind of like difficult to work with and frankly like a jerk. Like I'm able to have those honest conversations with people and they appreciate it. They're like, wow, I didn't realize I was coming across as, the A word, but I'll keep that in mind from now on.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it makes total sense to me. I mean, we talk a lot with a lot of different people in a lot of different fields, many of whom are coaches and assistants of various kinds, helping people in a variety of different ways. And one of the themes that comes through is just how valuable it is to have that person to talk to about whatever it is that you're having trouble with. Why not the same thing with a resume when you're trying to job hunt?
And not just the resume,
because you have a viewpoint that the other person doesn't have. You have, like you said, the objective viewpoint. You have the ability to see it in a way that you don't have a horse in the game. Your only horse is, well, let me see if I can help you out. That's about it.
Right. I think it's very easy to get objective feedback on your resume. I think it's a lot trickier to get objective feedback on your interview. And that's what I was referring to earlier when I was saying that I had to tell a client of mine that, hey, you don't really sound like a nice person because like that's what happens. Like we get really attached to our work and we're like, yeah, I was leading this project and I really wanted to make it work and it didn't work. And then you're suddenly like, you don't sound good anymore, and you're never going to have an interviewer turn around and say, hey, I felt like you weren't going to be fun to work with. So you do need somebody to give you that objective feedback if that's what your bottleneck is. Like you keep getting interviews, but not the job. Like you need to figure out what you're saying that's turning people off.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Understanding where your bottleneck is.
Exactly.
Are you not getting calls at all? Are you not getting interviews at all? If you are getting interviews, are you just not getting hired? Are you not getting the right offer? There's a lot of stuff that can be the bottleneck, and it's probably going to be very different from one person to the next.
Definitely.
But you have to identify it.
Yeah.
And you can have more than one, I would imagine.
You can, but I think most people just have the one.
Is that right? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Some people are like, oh my God, I just need to get an interview and I can get the job. And like, it's usually right. And some people are like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm getting all these interviews, but no one's hiring me. Or I'm getting all these offers, but they're too low. Or they're for like a junior position. Or they're all saying I'm overqualified, so it's usually like one thing. However, having a cohesive strategy can really help. Like if you are, for example, getting feedback constantly that you're overqualified, that first impression is probably being portrayed starting all the way from your resume, and then it's being propagated again in your interview. So you have to have the bottleneck might be one thing, but it's just the whole image that you really need to polish.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more why it's valuable to have a professional like yourself or your team helping, because it's a friggin' minefield. Let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It really is. So, all right. Well, let's say they go to your web. First of all, let's tell them about the website, and the company is CareerTuners. Tell them what happens when they reach the website.
When you go to CareerTuners.com, there's so much thought leadership that I put out on like hiring trends. I survey recruiters constantly on different topics, like what to do after an interview, what kind of resumes work well, what applicant tracking systems they're using, and what that means for how you need to work on your resume. There's so much on there depending on your, whatever you're looking for. I also put out a lot of guides on very specific bottlenecks that people run into, as we've been talking about. So like if you're considered a job hopper, how do you talk about that on your resume? How do you talk about that on your interview? How do you talk about if you had to take an employment leave because you were going through a very traumatizing divorce? Or how do you talk about if you had a business that failed? Like these are very specific and tricky questions that people have that totally derail otherwise really solid career trajectories. So I have tons of advice there that you can check out. However, if you're like, no, I don't have time for free advice, like I need professional help, you can just hop onto the services tab and check out our services and what we can do for you.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's probably a smart option for almost anybody.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot we do, all the way from like, helping you identify how to talk to your boss about giving you the projects that are going to look best on your resume for your next job or for your promotion, to negotiating your salary. Like it's more than just redoing your resume and interview. Like we want for you to find a job that you love, that pays you really well, that respects you, or we want you to negotiate with your boss on creating that at your current workplace. So we provide a broad range of services that can help anyone who is less than ecstatic about waking up Monday morning to get to work. So you can check that out. Also, while you're there, I recently put together a case study about this gentleman that we helped that basically redid their resume and doubled the initial offer that they were getting.
Nice.
Yeah, so you can check that out under the free resources tab. It's called My Salary Doubling Resume Cheat Sheet.
Well named. Yeah, and that's going to be attractive too. Yeah, double my salary. Okay, let's go. Sign me up. Where do I sign up? Where's the dotted line? Yeah, so that's good stuff. I just thought of something that I rarely do social media anymore, but obviously if I'm publishing the podcast, I'll put out, on Facebook, LinkedIn, all that. I'll put out stuff. In fact, we're live streaming to those two and YouTube right now. But really spend time on this. So it's kind of unusual for me to see a post and respond to it. But I saw a post and I'm going to be curious to see what your take is on it.
Sure.
The person, I'm trying to remember exactly what they said. I'm not sure if I'm going to get the exact wording, but kind of the gist of it was this. The reason that good people leave companies is because the wrong people get promoted. That was the proposition that they were putting out in that post.
Yeah.
And they got a lot of people agreeing, totally, absolutely right, totally right. A few people disagreed. I was actually one of the ones who disagreed, but I'm curious to know what your take is on that.
I think that's so personal. Like what people look for when they're leaving a job is so personal. Like some people might leave because they're just trying to transition industries and like the company literally cannot offer them any role that can engage them intellectually. So I think that is valid. However, I think a lot of people also do jobs that it doesn't really matter who's being promoted or not. It's like they are the they're individual contributors or they're leaders, and they're setting the tone for their own work. So I think it depends is the answer.
Okay, that's a fair answer. I mean, for myself, I thought it was a rather limited understanding of what appreciation is, because it basically says the only way I can be appreciated is if I'm promoted.
Yeah, exactly. And if you already like are, a very well-paid individual contributor who has flexibility and all of that, like maybe some people just don't want to be managers because they're like, you know what, I hate other people. I just want to do my own thing. And that's fine too. So, but I think perhaps what they were suggesting by that is like executive leadership being promoted and setting like, not good visions for the entire company. That could potentially be a reason, like, oh, the whole company is like going to the dogs.
And I remember I haven't worked in the corporate world myself for quite some
Mhm.
time. It's been about 25 years, something like that. But I remember that. I remember that that would be a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
One thing though that always I kind of hung back. I didn't really take people to task about this kind of thing, but it always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Not in a bad way. Not like, oh, I'm going to
Mhm.
fight you about it, but more like I think you're missing a point here. And
Mhm.
the point that I think they were missing was whoever the promoting manager is, whoever the senior manager is who's making the decision, they have a particular thing they're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
They're trying to accomplish a goal within the corporate structure that suits their own career and also suits what they're trying to accomplish with their department. And that doesn't always match up with what the other employees think it should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the decision was wrong. It just means there's a misalignment going on. You
Yeah.
got you got employees who think that the company should be going one way, and you got senior management saying, no, it should be going this way. And senior management
Yeah.
wins because they're senior management. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, the good people are being ignored. It just means there's a misalignment in terms of direction. What is the direction that the company needs to move in? I mean,
Yeah.
the last company I worked for was a mid-sized insurance company. And I could easily have made the argument that they were making really bad decisions that
Mhm.
were driving good people out. I could have made that argument easily because at that time, I was working in the IT field, and the company was clearly outsourcing everything to India.
Mhm.
It was at that time when there was that big outreach going on around the
Mhm.
turn of the millennium. And everybody could kind of see the writing on the wall. Everybody could tell that their own jobs were in peril. And we had worked enough with people from India. At that point, India's technological expertise was not at the point that it is right now. It was still in development. So we could
Mhm.
tell there were going to be problem areas. It was going to cause issues and so forth. So a lot of people came to that conclusion. They're driving the good people away by making bad decisions. And in fact, the way it played out was they basically shut down the department. They outsourced it to India, found it didn't work, and ended up outsourcing it to Ross Perot's old company. So
Mhm.
in that sense, everybody was right.
Mhm.
But in another sense, they were misguided because
Yeah.
the parts that they were leaving out was, quite honestly, the IT department as it was configured at that time was heavy with waste. It
Mhm.
really was. It was not well organized, in my opinion.
Mhm.
There was a lot of activity going on, a lot of money spent, and you kind of scratched your head and say, "Why are they doing that?"
I feel
And
like
in fact,
that's every IT department in the world.
it probably is. I mean, it's been a while since I've worked in the field, but
Sorry.
I was like scratching my head, and I didn't get it. I mean, for instance, there was a custom software package that they had written that was
Mhm.
kind of the equivalent of some of the modern stuff that would basically guide a customer flow for whatever it is that they're whatever services they're selling and so forth. And it was custom written. It was in house, and it was klutzy. I mean,
Yeah.
it just didn't work well. It
Yeah.
really didn't. And it was the driving force behind most of what everybody did in that department.
Mhm.
And and all I could do was just keep scratching my head and saying, "How do they see this playing out in 5 years?"
I think that's a really like I don't know. I've talked to a lot of IT professionals. It's like you don't know what's gonna happen in 5 years,
No,
either
you
with your
don't.
department, with your technology. Like you just don't know. Like there's no way to build like a proper 5-year roadmap. Um, no, that is a very interesting point. Yeah. And
No, never.
I read something else on social media the other day that I would like to float by you. So all of this
Sure.
automation that we are experiencing now, like with AI and everything, I think it's having the similar like fear impact that outsourcing did at the turn of the century. So
Yes.
I think with any kind of innovation like this, where you are fearful that you're going to lose your job, I think what's really happening is you're only at risk if your work is it requires very limited, like that human approach, right? Like connections. Like if you have connections at work, it's very unlikely that you're going to be outsourced. If your work requires like a lot of analysis and making judgment calls, like it's very unlikely that that can be outsourced to AI or to someone abroad who cannot understand the nuances of what you do. So if you're really trying to like recession proof, layoff proof yourself, I think these are the skills that you have to really work on, is being able to look at things and use a broad range of information to make decisions that can have far-reaching impacts. AI can't look at, it can't, it can just take the input that's being given, and it can produce an output. Whereas you as a person can have all these memories and intersecting experiences, and like this broad, rich life that you can use for decision making. So I think if you're confident about your ability to do that, and if you're constantly enriching your experience, like you don't really have much to be fearful for, at least in the professional space.
I can't specify what I think is going on in the corporate world because I don't know. I haven't been in there for 25 years, so I'm not sure. But I can tell you what my take is.
Sure.
My take is AI stands for artificial intelligence. Is about as accurate a term as IQ is, intelligence quotient. It actually has nothing to do with intelligence.
It doesn't.
Intelligence quotient has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with how well you can do on a standardized test. And the same thing is true with AI. It has nothing to do with intelligence. So AI is not about a thinking, living being. Not yet. That could happen. We're kind of pointing in that direction, but we are not there yet. We're not even close to that yet. As long as that's the case, the question I would be asking myself is kind of touching a bit on what you talked about there. There will always be use for people who know how to interact with people. How are your interaction skills? What are your interaction skills? What is your network? Not just your business network. What's your social network?
Yeah.
How developed is it? In fact, I'll tell you something that I've laid out to listeners in other podcast episodes in different contexts, but it fits very nicely here. I don't know how familiar you are with the field of positive psychology. It's kind of evolved over the last 30 years or so as a new field. And one of the spokesmen of that field is Sean Aker, who helped to found the first positive psychology department as a grad student at Harvard University. He has since written a number of books. He's a speaker. He travels around, teaches at corporations and so forth. And while he was at Harvard, he conducted a study that took about 1/5 of the entire population of the school to fill out the study and answer it. He was trying to identify, he was really trying to solve a problem. The problem he was trying to solve is, as you might imagine, Harvard students are extremely stressed out. They are absolutely, all of them are top achievers. They all show up and they find that everybody else is a top achiever. And oh my God, the competition is incredible. What the hell am I going to do? And they burn out and they flame out. And it's all kinds of terrible stuff going on. So he wanted to find a way to help them know if they do A, B, and C, they're going to succeed. So they could take the pressure off. So he put together this big survey and he tried to identify every factor he could think of that could possibly impact it. What's their family life come from? Does it really make a difference whether you come from a well-known family? What are your study habits? Do you study in the dorm? Do you study in the library? How often do you visit the professor? How often do you talk with other students? I mean, he was just everything he could think of. He couldn't find any correlations except for one. And it was the question he threw on as an afterthought. And the question was about social connectedness. It turned out the degree and quality of your social connectedness was 70% predictive of your success in life. And as a comparison, the correlation between smoking cigarettes and getting cancer is just 44%.
Yeah, I think I've read this study. Yeah, it has to do with the longevity of your life too as well, right?
Yeah. It applies to all areas of success, not just career success.
Yeah.
But it really highlights just how vitally important your social network is, your connections.
It does.
And the more time, the people who put the time in to develop those connections, business, social, personal, whatever, doesn't matter what they are. It's the people connections. The ones who develop those people connections, it doesn't matter what kind of career path they have. It doesn't matter whether they stay in the corporate world or become entrepreneurs. It doesn't matter if they quit and become moms or dads at home, as stay-at-home moms. It doesn't matter. Anything that they're trying to accomplish, the better their social connections are, the greater the likelihood they're going to succeed at it. Absolutely. So instead of worrying about AI, how about worrying about what your connections are? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I have a quick tip for, if you're younger and you're having a hard time making friends, I highly recommend Bumble BFF. So Bumble, I guess, started off as a dating app, but I really like to find friends. They have like a BFF section and a networking section to flip your profile to that. And
I met my best friend on Bumble BFF.
Really? No kidding.
I highly recommend it. Yeah. She left me. She moved to Seattle. So I'm finding her
Aw.
replacement right now.
So the BFF was actually BF for a year.
Best friend. Yeah, exactly.
But still, that's great though. That's really cool.
BFT, best friend temporary.
Temporary. Yeah. Okay. That's good. All right. I was never good with the acronym, so thanks for clarifying. But no, I love that. I love that using any kind of tool that's available to us.
Yeah,
'Cause we have so many
meetups
tools
is
now.
great if you're looking for like a broader,
Yeah.
shallower friendship pool. Like I'm in so many book clubs, and I recently joined like a Urdu poetry club, which is super specific. But they had a meetup for that, and I joined it. I was encouraged to do so by another friend that I met at another book club. So if you're looking for like a broad range of friendships, which is generally more useful when you're networking anyway,
Right.
meetups.com's so great for that.
Let's talk about that word networking. That's one, I know that one confused me for a long time. I suspect it's still confusing to some people because it sounds like going out and just, trying to buttonhole and sell people.
Yeah.
But that's not really what it is. I mean,
No,
how do
it's
you understand networking? How do you think about it?
I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they make it too difficult for the other person to help them. I think a lot of people conflate networking with going to people and asking them for jobs, which is a very difficult thing to do because if someone comes to me and asks me that, I have to ask, do I have the time to assess this person? Is this my reputation on the line if I recommend them? Like there's too much work and too much at stake for me to do something like that. So when networking, the best way to be able to kind of galvanize that process is to ask people for very small favors that don't take any effort. So usually information, right? So I'm trying to break into this field. Is there a resource that you would recommend? Is there a website you would recommend? Is there a book that you'd recommend? Is there a meetup group that you would recommend? I'm considering signing up for the certification, and I noticed from your LinkedIn that you have it. Has this been instrumental to your career? So what this does is two things. First, like you get the information that you want. And the second thing is you're subtly making them aware without shoving your resume in their face that you're looking for work. And if something opens up, you'll be top of mind. And you're allowing yourself to introduce a conversation where you can ask for bigger and bigger pieces of information, right? So do you know of any companies that are doing similar work right now? Do you know anybody at that company that you could introduce me to? You can just kind of work up the level of effort they're giving you, and it's going to be easier and easier for them to say yes because they've already rationalized they've invested in you and they like you. So it's like asking someone to marry you. Like you don't go to the next, hot person in line at Starbucks and be like, hey, let's get married and have 3 children. Like you have to.
You start with having the coffee at Starbucks. That's what you actually do.
Yeah, you have to ease into it, You can't
Right.
just go around asking people. This isn't the 1700s, for God's sake.
I actually go a little bit further than that. I'm curious to know what your take is going to be on this.
Okay.
But I actually learned that the easiest way to network is to not worry about outcomes.
Oh yeah.
And
But I think that's difficult, right? Like I think that's easy to say, and it's very difficult.
Well,
when we have so much anxiety about
the way I think about that is I'm not going out there to try to find somebody who can advance my career. I'm going out there to see who I can meet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then that takes all the pressure off. Now it's not about advancing the career. This is just about expanding my friendship circle.
Okay, so here's my little devil's advocate point to that.
Yeah.
I think what people do when they're networking is they'll just find one person and be like, oh, okay, we have a little bit of chemistry, and they'll just talk to that one person forever. Whereas like networking is about like having a broad network of like more contacts so that you're like expanding the scope of what you're doing. So that's me personally. I feel like if I had to just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go out and have fun, I would just find one person and I would just keep seeing that same person again and again. If it's like a group meetup, I'd just keep sitting next to them. As opposed to if you have like this, you can have the intention that I'm gonna have fun and I'm gonna try to like take away something really enjoyable from this experience. But I'm also going to try to see if I can add these people to my LinkedIn profile. Like just have something like kind of low pressure like that. I think that would help kind of balance both of the
Yeah.
two approaches. Yeah.
I like that. I mean, I agree with you. It's very easy to fall into that space of I'm just going to connect to one person and that's it. It's kind of
It's
like
safe.
it's
Yeah.
the codependent form of social connection.
Oops, calling me out.
But I guess the way I kind of look at it is, like I can tell a story right here based on what happened on the podcast. I had a guest
Okay.
on. Let's see, when did she come on? She was on about 10 days ago. Her name was Tony, and she had built a really remarkable company. I think it was like a $3 billion company. It was affiliate marketing attached to it. It was in hair care products, and she had all this really cool stuff going on. Really interesting conversation. And after we're done, as so often happens when we do these shows, there was like an after show conversation where we just were kind of chewing the fat about stuff. And she asked me, what are you doing on what's going on with you? So I shared a couple things and mentioned at one point there's a project I've been working on for the last year and a half, and running into frustrations with programmers, developers, software developers. And suddenly the conversation turned into, well, I know somebody who can help you with that. Now, I wasn't looking to find somebody to solve my software developer problem. I was looking to just make this great connection on my podcast. But look what it turned into.
Yeah.
This could actually end up solving a problem that's been bedeviling me for like the last year and a half.
Wow.
Totally unexpected.
Maybe you didn't even know you had that need and she like articulated it for you. Like, have you ever had that where someone is like, oh, I know an app that can do that for you?
I knew I had the need. I didn't know where I could find the solution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because every time I tried to find a solution, that was just running into more developers who didn't know what they were doing. And that it's much more problematic than you might think.
Yeah.
It turns out that software developers very often are very poor at scoping out a project.
Okay.
Typically, when you go to work for a corporation, they, as a software developer, they give you little tiny bits and piece projects.
Right.
And you do one little piece, and then you have a milestone to fix. You have to get this one done by a certain time, and you get it done by the time, and then they give you the next little morsel to do, because that's as much as a linear thinker, because that's what a programmer is a very left-brained thinking, very linear, very logical in a sense, very logical stream of thought. That's the best way for somebody like that to handle a larger project, is one little bit at a time. If they try to envision the whole project themselves, they're probably going to dramatically underestimate how much time it's going to take to do.
Yeah.
So that's why it's divvied out that way. And I'm learning the hard way that I should have done that. But there's also the other side that I was kind of pointing to here, which is you never really know where a contact is going to go. If you can allow yourself to, like you say, you don't want to get tied down to one person, but if you can allow yourself to just keep making contacts just to see where they go, just to find out, just to learn what this new perspective is and so forth, that's when magic starts to happen, or seemingly magic starts to happen. Because all of a sudden, in one of those conversations, something comes up and you say, whoa, where did that come from? But that's exactly what I was needing.
Right.
I mean, pure law of attraction is what that is, right? We talk about law of attraction around the show. That's law of attraction right there.
Yeah, you're maximizing how many faces you're seeing. So it's like, okay, there's more people out there that know what I do and can support me. And that sounds like a lot of work. And I think the key to this is like, if you're a very introverted person, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to network. This is like so much work. What you can do is really just find things that interest you and find similar groups of people and find something that excites you. If you're doing this, like if you're in marketing and you're like, marketing professional association near me, okay, I'm gonna go and like be all professional, and you're like, this is filling me with dread and I feel my spirit like falling apart. Okay, do something else. Like find a way to make this a little bit joyful, and so that you're actually looking forward to it and excited about it. Because that energy that you bring, if you're like harried and stressful and stressed out and you're like, you're hating how much pressure you're putting on yourself, like that's going to come through and you're going to look like not very fun to work with, as opposed to if you're generally having a good time, you're going to be a lot more attractive.
That really brings us back front and center to the original topic, which was people needing help getting a job, getting a better situation and so forth. And it's got a side point that I consider to be vital. We haven't brought it up before now. I want to bring it up now while we still have some time left to discuss it. So many people today, and I think it's actually worse today than when I was growing up. And it was pretty bad when I was growing up. So many people today are all about picking a field based on how much money they can make.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very few people are even aware of the idea of pursuing something because they love it. And
Mm-hmm.
if the idea is proposed to them, it's so radical that it scares the pants off them, so they don't want to consider it. That's
Mm-hmm.
my perception of it. I'm curious to know what your perception is.
I think it's very difficult to say like I love X, Y, and Z field and I'm gonna do it forever. I think because everything's evolving at such a rapid pace these days, it's better to identify, okay, these are the soft skills that I love executing. I love coaching people, or I love analyzing data and figuring out what we should do in terms of a direction. Like I feel like this can help you be more not malleable, agile, I guess, and
Yeah.
like you know, flexible around different career goals that you might have as you approach different stages in your life, from requiring more work-life balance if you're becoming a parent, to requiring more salary if you're buying a house, or whatever it is. So I think that's really important. When I was young, like I had this goal, like I had to go into irrigation management. Like I had to
Okay.
help people with water supply issues in developing countries, especially in agricultural societies. It was like, that's it. There's nothing else. And I'm not doing that, but it's not like I'm lying awake at night being like, I didn't fulfill my dream. Because at the end of the day, like the whole thing about, you know, that the overall mission that I guess I wanted to achieve was to make it so that social inequality wasn't like that big of, like to just lessen the impact of social inequality in whatever way I can. And I feel like I'm doing that now by helping people,
Cool.
make more money and advocate for themselves and all of that. So I'm not helping farmers with water necessarily, but I'm still like the overall objective of what I wanted is still being fulfilled, and I go to sleep feeling very satisfied. So that's I think what you have to figure out, like what the root is of whatever is making you feel so excited, and see if there's other implications of that you can exercise to just kind of keep yourself a little bit sharp. You don't want to get stale and be stuck in one thing for too long in this fast-paced world.
And you're looking a little bit past those initial boundaries you set up for yourself too. You kind
Yeah,
of set up like a
exactly.
little fence for yourself. I wasn't going to look outside that fence. Then you looked outside the fence, and wow, I can still do stuff that satisfies me. That's not within that particular field. How cool!
Yeah. And I think if I had gone into irrigation management, frankly, I'd be feeling a little unfulfilled because it's all engineering and I really love working with people, and I think I would eventually have gotten very lonely and burnt out. So it's it's all for the best, really.
That's a great point, because burnout happens for a number of reasons.
Yes.
It's hard to quantify them, but I think probably one of the main things that happens is people end up doing kinds of work that they really don't enjoy.
Yeah. Or they're not doing the work that they know they would enjoy. I think there's a word for it. Like there's obviously like physical burnout, mental burnout, emotional burnout, but there's also spiritual burnout.
Yeah.
Like you're doing something that is not fulfilling your spirit. And I mean, I'm not religious. I don't like, it's not like about your soul or like, all of that. It's just about like, if I keep doing this, is my spirit going to be crushed? What makes my spirit feel fulfilled? I had a colleague in my marketing team, and he's like, we did his little strengths assessment thing together, and he had coaching in there. And I was like, if coaching is not a part of your job description, like, will you quit? And he was like, I think I would need to in the next 2 years. And he hadn't even considered that. It was like, he didn't even know that part of his life wasn't being fulfilled. And he was like, yeah, I feel like I would need to have a team under me in order to feel like I could stay at this company for 10 years. And we talked about like, okay, these are the technical skills you need to master in order for me to take you seriously as a manager, blah, blah, blah. And, I developed a roadmap for him accordingly. But I think a lot of people don't have that understanding of what makes their spirit feel fulfilled. And that's so important.
It requires self-exploration, really. And
Yes.
and that's something, again, we're so inundated with information today, we kind of forget to go within. We kind of forget that the information that we're looking for really isn't out there, it's inside, and you have to go there
Yes.
first. If you don't do that, you're just gonna kind of spin. You're gonna spin your wheels, you're gonna spin your resumes, everything's gonna spin, but you're not actually gonna get somewhere you want to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty vitally important.
I'm rolling out a new like ChatGPT based career exploration
Mm.
script with my
Hmm.
colleague, where we're just basically going to help ChatGPT identify your strengths and spit out like a career path that would be like perfect for you. It's a big project, so it's
Yeah.
taking us a bit of time. But if that sounds exciting to you, stay in touch with me, and I'll let you know when it's out.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds really good. This has been a very interesting conversation. Now, tell us again about the Career Tuners website, and tell us more specifically about the one-on-one type programs and the coaching programs that you guys do.
Sure. So it's careertuners.com. It's careertuners.com. And we have a broad range of services that basically help you feel more fulfilled at your job and get more money for it. This entails helping you decide which career path is best for you, coaching you on how to talk to your boss about getting promotions and getting some of those projects that would look really good in your portfolio, all the way to negotiating your salary with you. And in the middle, obviously, is your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, your interview strategy, all of that. So whatever it is that you feel your bottleneck is, we can help you with it.
And once again, I'm going to pin you down on this one, pretty much because I did it before, and I know what the answer is. But I think we can both agree: don't just go for the free material.
Mhm.
Reach out and talk to somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
That connection to somebody else who can look at your situation and help guide you through in ways you hadn't even thought of.
Mhm.
Yeah, man, it's almost impossible to overemphasize just how powerful that is.
Yep, yep, yep. I mean, you might not even know that you had another problem. Just like my colleague didn't even know that, okay, maybe I do need to be a manager if I want to be
Yeah.
happy, you know? So you
Mhm.
might not even know until you talk to somebody.
Because that's part of what you do when you're in that conversation with somebody. You're trying to draw them out on stuff that perhaps they hadn't even thought about.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I mean, we have a lot. We have 13 years of experience in this space, so we have seen everything. We have seen industries evolving out of nothing and collapsing into nothing. So
Mm.
we know how to help professionals tell their story, no matter what.
And one last thought too. People often feel fearful about investing in themselves. Why should they
Mhm.
invest in themselves despite the fear?
I mean, it's like investing to go to the gym, right? Like it's good for you. Like if you
It's
don't do
good for
it,
you.
it's gonna deteriorate into nothing. No, no, okay, that's too morbid. Um, It's important to invest in yourself because no one is gonna do it for you. I mean, we're all adults
Mm.
here. Like, we don't have mommy and daddy anymore, right, to invest in for us. We have to do it if we want to make the best. And like everybody who's a top performer has coaches. I mean, top sports people have their coaches that help them.
Mhm.
Top professionals have coaches that help them, that guide them. And you know, like if you have ever had a good manager, what you probably love about them is the fact that they were a mentor to you, that they coached you rather than, just merely instructing you and training you. A
Mhm.
good manager that helps someone like really thrive is one that does that. So if you benefited from like the coaching of a good manager, it's very likely that you'll benefit from a coach in your personal life too.
Great points. Great points. I love that. Well, thank you once again for joining us on the program. One thing I do need to tell you too, because I know already because of the material you put out on your website and you do all these podcasts and so forth. You definitely fit into the category of the giver. And
Uh-huh.
givers are the ones we like to have on the show as guests, and you fit that beautifully. One thing about givers is that givers don't tend to get recognized for the people that they help that they never meet because they're putting all this stuff out there. They don't know who's consuming all of it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they get the
Mhm.
contact, but very often they don't. So I like to recognize it by saying, for all those people, on behalf of all those people you've never met and that you've never seen who have benefited from the stuff you've been putting out, thank you for what you've been doing and what you continue to
Oh,
do.
it's my pleasure. This is what my dream is. So thanks for making my dream a reality, really.
Ooh, I like that. Really good. Excellent stuff. So thank you so much. And people go to careertuners.com. We'll make sure that we'll put that into the show notes so you can find it as easily as possible. But, if you've been thinking that it's time to, make a shift, don't keep thinking about it. Take a step,
Yeah,
reach
yeah.
out. Fatima's waiting for you. Call. The staff are standing by waiting to take your call. No, I mean, not so far from the truth, though. Yeah, it's very important. Take control of your life. Fatima, thank you again. Appreciate your time here on the show. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.